And speaking of fun and frolic, the New York Times seems to endorse the it just gives you a sense of just like how much unfun I must be at home. Mile is like, let's play. Okay, let's play. Let's play. Pretend that the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal is some kind of boon to everybody. All right. The New York Times, I guess this is on Tuesday, came out with an editorial talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which have talks which have been ongoing for years. The Obama administration has been engaged in them heavily. Now, you haven't seen... Now, we have done, I believe, at least one or two interviews on this in maybe a year ago, because different drafts and parts of the drafts have been leaked because this is being done completely behind closed doors. Even lawmakers have not been briefed on these deals. However, a lot of industry lawyers have. To the extent, well, let me just first read what the New York Times says. We have expressed concerns about controversial American proposal that would limit the ability of the Trans-Pacific countries, that would be United States, Canada, Mexico, Peru, Chile, Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, Australia, and New Zealand, to regulate the sale of tobacco products. Others are worried about provisions on intellectual property that could restrict the availability of generic medicines and grant longer copyright protections to big media companies. So they have raised some of the objections by going about not even an inch deep. A good agreement would lower duties and trade barriers on most products and services, strengthen labor and environmental protections, limit the ability of governments to tilt the playing field in favor of state-owned firms, and balance the interests of consumers and creators of intellectual property. Such a deal will not only help individual countries, but set an example for global trade talks. This is bizarre. The juxtaposition of that paragraph with the paragraph before it is just bizarre. The reason why the Times has expressed concerns about controversial American proposal that would limit the ability of Trans-Pacific countries to regulate the sale of tobacco products is because this agreement would cede control of democratic countries to regulate, to provide consumer protections, to provide labor protections, to provide environmental protections, and cede that control to a non-democratically elected three-person board made up of industry lawyers who will basically decide whether or not an individual country's consumer protections, environmental protections, labor protections inhibit the profit projections, the realization of profit projections by corporations. So the dynamic that the New York Times is concerned about in terms of tobacco exists for just about everything that deals with consumer protections, environmental protections, and labor protections. The idea, they can wish all they want for a good government, good agreement that would lower duties. I don't even know if duties are even talked about in the context of this deal. The trade barriers they're talking about are exactly those ones which would inhibit a country's ability to say, hey, you know, tobacco, we're not interested in selling to minors. It will not strengthen labor and environmental protection. In fact, the TPP does exactly the opposite. And not only does it do the opposite, it destroys the mechanisms in which individual countries could create those protections for the environment and for labor. It will certainly limit the ability of governments to tilt the playing field in favor of state-owned firms. It will tilt it in favor of corporations who simply get to write the rules. This is all leading up to a push for fast-track authorization. In other words, the Congress allowing the president to just sign off on it. And the reason why they want fast-tracked is because if these provisions get any real play in the press, if these provisions have any real debate, it's going to go down in flames. And not just from the legitimate left, but also from the far right. I mean, because when you talk about one world governments, we don't need a one world government because there's just going to be one world corporation. It really is stunning. The New York Times could put out this editorial that is just so thin.
So the New York Times wrote an editorial endorsing an imagined version that doesn't exist of something that actually does exist that's really problematic in practice. Sounds like some of our pro-GMO listeners to me.
No. What it sounds like to me is exactly what Thomas Friedman said. I don't like the reasons for invading Iraq. I got my own.
Oh, even more specifically, Thomas Friedman, when CAFTA was being debated, which was the Central American Free Trade Agreement, he said, I never read any of these bills. I just see free trade in the title. I support it.
What a brilliant guy.